If you were to ask a Pokemon TCG player what the most broken card ever was, I'm sure you'd get a lot of different answers. Some newer players might say something like Archetypes or Scoop Up Net, both good choices. An old school player might say something like Slowking from Neo Genesis or Professor Oak, which was an item card for some reason. And someone right in the middle might say something like Lysander's Trump card, or maybe Shaymin EX. This card has pitiful HP and only does 30 damage for 2 energy. But despite not looking fantastic at first, this card was once the best in the game by a long shot. A card whose ability is so game breaking that we will never see it printed on a card ever again. A card that was so fundamentally broken that it not only got numerous cards banned forever, but it would eventually succumb to the same fate. Today I'm here to break down the history of this card, its initial impact, game breaking strength, toxic nature, and why it eventually got banned forever.
Ready? Go!
Shaymin EX was released in the X and Y Roaring Skies expansion in mid-2015, and Roaring Skies would be the newest set legal for the Pokemon World Championships as well as the National Championships in 2015. Shaymin EX has a terrible 110 HP on a 2-prize EX Pokemon, and it only deals 30 damage with this attack Sky Return for 2 colorless energy, and it puts itself into your hand. Thus, this card basically has no offensive presence. Because of this, a kid reading the card for the first time would likely think that, oh, it sucks because it doesn't do any damage. However, we all know that's not why Shaymin was used. That's because it has one of the most insane abilities in Pokemon TCG history, Setup. Setup, when Shaymin is played from your hand onto your bench, it allows you to draw cards until you have 6 cards in your hand. It's hard to put into words how insane this ability is being on a basic Pokemon. For some perspective, Bianca is a supporter card that does the exact same thing, and it has seen tournament success. Cynthia's Ambition only lets you draw until you have 5 cards in your hand unless your Pokemon were knocked out, and it's also seen tournament success. The thing is that these cards I just listed are limited to 1 use per turn. Shaymin EX has no such restrictions. You could use 4, heck, even 5 or 6 Shaymin in a single turn if you were able to, and eventually players were able to, but more on that later. The crazy thing was that each Shaymin could draw you up to 6 at a time without using a single supporter for the turn. The sheer magnitude of draw power provided by Shaymin made playing less draw supporters like Sycamore and N, and more tech supporters for your turn more feasible, since Shaymin could make up the draw power that supporters like Hex Maniac, which disabled all abilities until your next turn, and Pokemon Ranger, which removed effects of attacks on each player and their Pokemon, lack. With Ultra Ball being so prevalent, Shaymin could easily be grabbed out with a discard of 2 other cards, turning Ultra Ball into more draw power for your deck. Shaymin was obviously the best card in Roaring Skies, and that's saying something considering all the other incredible cards in the set like Trainer's Mail and Skyfield. Speaking of Skyfield, Shaymin looked like it had a perfect partner right off the bat with the new Mega Rayquaza EX. Mega Rayquaza was a weird Mega Evolution, just like in the video games funnily enough. Unlike every other Mega Evolution, Mega Rayquaza could be evolved on your first turn or the turn you put it into play with this Ancient Trait evolution. Hilariously, the secret rare Mega Rayquaza from Ancient Origins was actually significantly worse than the Roaring Skies one, since its new Ancient Trait Max that healed itself when evolving was just way worse than cheating it into play early. Anyways, this mattered a lot since item lock was kind of the main barrier Mega Evolutions had to overcome, only because the Mega Evolution ends your turn unless you have a Spirit Link tool card attached to the base EX, and back then tool cards counted as item cards. However, since Mega Rayquaza could evolve on your first turn, this meant you could dodge item locks and evolve as early as turn 1. Even without a Spirit Link, since you couldn't attack going first anyway, so it was a good way to end your turn. Mega Rayquaza's attack Emerald Break did 30 damage for each of your benched Pokemon, and with Skyfield expanding the bench size to 8, this meant that for 3 colorless you were swinging for 240 at most, easily one-shotting everything in the game except for Wailord EX, which survived at 10 HP. Unfathomably, you could even get this attack on your very first turn of the game with Mega Turbo, which accelerated a basic energy from the discard pile to one of your Mega Pokemon. And with a double colorless energy, this was very feasible. But as most of us all know, Mega Rayquaza wouldn't be the most prominent abuser of Shaymin right off the bat. Now it's time to get to arguably the most toxic deck in Pokemon TCG history. Once Shaymin EX came out, players instantly, and I mean instantly, started abusing it. Roaring Skies released on May 6, 2015. And not even 1 month later, on June 1st, 2015, a card that synergized too well with Shaymin was banned forever for creating too toxic of a format. So what happened? Well, Seismitoad EX was dominating the Pokemon TCG for a while, even before Roaring Skies released. For one double colorless energy, Quaking Punch does 30 and item locks, which combined with numerous disruption cards like the Hammers, Team Flare Grunt, Xerosic, Headringer, Hypnotoxic Laser, and Burbank City Gym, basically aimed to prevent the opponent from playing the game. It was extremely toxic already, but Shaymin took it to a whole different stratosphere. With the draw power Shaymin provided, Seismitoad could spam Quaking Punch over and over again, while you spam Team Flare Grunt and other disruption cards until you hit 0 cards in your deck. Now obviously, hitting 0 cards in your deck and ending your turn means you lose the game, right? Well, about that, Lysander's trump card is a contender for the most broken Pokemon card of all time. It straight up shuffles both players' entire discard piles back into their deck. Keep in mind, this included the VS Seeker item, which recovered supporters from the discard pile. So with just one trump card and one VS Seeker, you could go infinite the entire game. And I'm not talking about those fake infinite loops like praying you flip heads on Silene. This allowed Seismitoad players to not only recover Scoop Up Cyclones and keep spamming Shaymin to draw into all your disruption cards again, but you also often clogged up your opponent's deck with the few item cards they got to play on their first turn of the game, basically ensuring you could forever torment the opponent into submission, getting hit by Quaking Punch turn after turn. It got so bad that on June 1st, Pokemon banned Lysander's trump card from both Standard and Expanded forever, in TPCI sanctioned events and also in Japan, killing the strategy dead once the ban went into effect 2 weeks later. However, in those 2 weeks, on June 6th, Australian Nationals players completely abused the deck, placing 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 8th, proving once and for all that this was the right decision. I don't know what Pokemon was thinking printing trump card in the first place, but I guess it was a blessing in disguise that Shaymin got it banned sooner rather than later. After the meta returned to a slightly more healthy state, Shaymin went on a tear at US Nationals, with Jason Klaczynski winning the whole event with a Seismitoad Garbodor deck. Shaymin though was finding success in way more than just Seismitoad decks. It was finding success in every archetype, including Bronzong Box, Archie's Blastoise, Big Basic Raichu Box, and of course, Mega Rayquaza. Worlds 2015 would take place in the same format as US Nationals, and Shaymin EX featured in all 4 of the top 4 decks, winning in Archie's Blastoise, placing 2nd and 3rd in Seismitoad Crobat decks, and 4th in one of the greatest decks ever, Night March. With Seismitoad being so dominant for so long, and Lysander's trump card, existing, Night March didn't have as good of an opportunity to shine. But with trump card banned, this archetype had room to breathe now, placing 4th, 6th, and 9th at the World Championships. Shaymin was clearly impacting every archetype it was featured in, but even with a Worlds win under its belt, it didn't stop there. The 2016 Pokemon TCG season was dominated by Shaymin EX. Ancient Origins provided Shaymin its unofficial sidekick, another broken mythical Pokemon EX, Hoopa EX. Scoundrel Ring, when Hoopa is played onto your bench from the hand, searches the deck for 3 Pokemon EX outside of Hoopa and puts them into your hand. Now, one Ultra Ball could find Hoopa, and Hoopa could find multiple Shaymin and one of your powerful attacking Pokemon EX, allowing you to draw even more with Shaymin, all without using your supporter. Mega Rayquaza saw a huge upsurge in usage following this, but despite every Hoopa deck containing Shaymin, the opposite wasn't always true. Hoopa had a 2 retreat cost, meaning it could get stuck in the active spot easier, even with the reprint of the broken Floatstone tool card in the next set, Breakthrough. But despite both Shaymin and Hoopa being liabilities to put into play in some matchups, players didn't care because the reward of Shaymin was so high. Night March is an archetype fully built around abusing single prize Pokemon, and even that deck had 2 to 3 Shaymin as a staple inclusion since it was so good in the deck despite the liability. And it could actually help in the mirror match, funnily enough, since Sky Return could OHKO a Joltik while preserving your double colorless energy. The Ancient Origins expansion also gave Seismitoad some new tools to work with, like Giratina EX as a decent partner, and Hex Maniac for some low maintenance ability lock. Hex Maniac also just synergizes super well with Shaymin, since Shaymin could draw you so many cards that playing Hex Maniac right before the end of your turn didn't come at the cost of draw power. And disabling your opponent's Shaymin and other draw abilities with no counterplay at the same time was extremely oppressive to some archetypes. Breakthrough was another high impact expansion, and Shaymin only seemed to benefit more and more. With Floatstone, Hoopa became more commonplace in EX-centric decks, and Mega Mewtwo Y releasing and being a pretty good deck made Night March stonks surge even more, and Shaymin was a staple in Night March. Shaymin was winning basically every tournament in one archetype or another, and by the time of National Championships in mid-2016, Shaymin was basically a necessity in your deck if you wanted to succeed. Night March, Vespiquen, Bronzong, Seismitoad, Yveltal, Darkrai, Trevenant, everything. Shaymin synergized stupidly well with some newer cards from Breakpoint too. Fighting Fury Belt meant you could potentially cover up the 110 HP liability by at least allowing it to survive some weaker attacks due to the extra 40 HP. Max Elixir also worked well with Shaymin, since you often wanted to play Max Elixir after drawing as many cards as possible first to maximize the odds of a hit, similar to Pokegear 3.0 or Electric Generator. Shaymin could draw you a few extra cards and ensure that your Max Elixirs could hit with better efficiency. Darkrai EX was a turbo deck at its finest. And do I even need to explain why Shaymin was good here? Puzzle of Time is another broken trainer card that allowed for some resource recovery shenanigans, but only worked if 2 of them were in your hand. And Shaymin helped pull off Puzzle of Time combos better than even the best draw supporters could. Fates Collide and Generations were also pretty impactful expansions, and Shaymin was actually seen in the 2016 World Championship winning deck that came out of Fates Collide, Mega Audino. Steam Siege released with some more Shaymin synergy. Volcanion EX was a turbo big basic deck that appreciated extra draw power, and the Mega Gardevoir EX from this set needed to discard benched Pokemon to maximize its damage output, which made Shaymin even more useful. At the World Championships in 2016, every archetype except for Greninja Break, which didn't want to play basic Pokemon outside of Froakie, played multiple copies of Shaymin EX. It just made every deck better, and it felt like you were playing at a disadvantage for not putting more Shaymin in your deck. Oh yeah, I think it's worth covering an aspect of the game that I usually don't cover with these types of videos: price. Shaymin EX, the basic non-EX full art from Roaring Skies, was often sitting at around $90 to $100 a piece. Yes, $100 for just one copy of a regular EX card. That's how good it was, to the point that a full playset of Shaymin costs over 5 times as much as the entire 2025 World Championship winning deck. Anyways, following Worlds, Evolutions released, and the format became Primal Clash and on. This time, Shaymin actually looked much worse off than before. Night March and Seismitoad both rotated out, and those were always some of Shaymin's best synergies. And following rotation, Garbodor decks started to dominate, like Yveltal Garb and Darktina Garb. But despite more ability lock, Shaymin actually did just fine. The reason is that to even even set up a full Garbodor with the least amount of deck space possible, Shaymin EX was often the best bet, since it synergized so well with Ultra Ball, and seeing more cards meant higher odds of hitting the combo you wanted on the turn you wanted it, even despite ability locks. The problem with Shaymin should be becoming obvious by now. It just draws too many cards and enabled too many combo plays for its deck space. This led to the Shaymin metas being extremely tech-based, with practically every archetype having around 5 tech spots to either surprise the opponent or fix bad matchups. But funnily enough, this only made the meta more interesting in my opinion, since matchup advantages became less important with more tech cards, and skill was then able to shine. Also, Shaymin just naturally removed some of the luck from the game, since the draw power made whiffing combos less likely, again letting skill shine through. Anyways, the late X and Y format was an evil tall guard meta, and Shaymin was a permanent staple in these decks just like every other deck in the game. Mega Gardevoir was starting to gain some traction again thanks to Dragonite EX from Evolutions recovering basic Pokemon from the discard pile, allowing for a max power Gardevoir attack to be fired off more consistently. Mega Rayquaza was also making a comeback with less item lock in the format, and more high HP Pokemon being weak to it. And not playing 4 Shaymin in Mega Ray is like not playing 4 Sada in Raging Bolt. Once Sun and Moon base set came out, grass decks built around Decidueye GX and Vileplume took the spotlight, and Shaymin once again enabled these decks that were built around forests of giant plants, since drawing into your Pokemon without using a supporter to evolve them right away was vital to consistency since you couldn't play item cards. Then with more grass decks like Decidueye that failed to hit big numbers running around, Mega Rayquaza rose a bit more in popularity to deal with these higher HP thresholds, which were unreachable for most other decks. Volcanion was thriving, Darkrai was still good, and the whole meta looked like Shaymin Simulator for months. But suddenly, once Guardians Rising released, Shaymin started to struggle, all thanks to the pile of trash that turned your pile of trash into your demise. Garbodor. Trashalanche made turbo decks less popular and powerful, and the meta warped to favor slower setup decks that didn't play as many item cards like Gardevoir eventually. Inherently, less turbo means less Shaymin. Sure, it was still used in some turbo decks that had low HP single prizers and thus didn't care about Garbodor like Vespiquen and Gyarados, but Mega Rayquaza and Volcanion had to adapt drastically as a result, and they struggled badly with Garbodor dominating. Suddenly, Shaymin stopped winning events, and by the World Championships, it was seen far less than it had before. It turned out Garbodor was more of a thorn in its side than it looks at first glance, since there wasn't a single Shaymin in the entire top 8 of the event. Tapu Lele GX had straight up replaced Shaymin in most decks. It had higher HP, it did good damage, and it was still great for your deck's consistency. Shaymin had been replaced, but I guess the best time to be replaced is when you're about to be fired anyways, since after Worlds 2017, Shaymin rotated out, and thus the dominance we had come to expect from it in the standard format had finally come to an end. But this is far from where Shaymin EX's story ends. Now we get into a topic I rarely discuss on this channel, expanded format. You see, during this fall off of Shaymin in the standard format before it rotated, the exact opposite was occurring in expanded. And much like Trump Card, Shaymin couldn't stop getting cards banned. Going back to 2015, once Ancient Origins and Forest of Giant Plants released, this Shiftry card from Next Destiny started dominating expanded, winning games on turn 1 no matter how many Pokemon the opponent put into play with a stupid donk strategy. This led to a ban of Shiftry and expanded just 3 weeks of the set releasing due to creating an uninteractive and toxic play environment. Funnily enough, in the official post announcing the ban, Pokemon acknowledges that the strategy works consistently because of Shaymin EX, but Shaymin still avoided the ban hammer. Next to talk about is Archeops from Noble Victories and Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick from Primal Clash, both of which combined for an extremely toxic turn 1 play that prevented the opponent from evolving their Pokemon for the rest of the game, creating a hostile environment and resulting in the bans. But once again, none of this would have been possible without Shaymin EX's draw power, as proved by the Archie's Blastoise deck that won Worlds in 2015. Delinquent is just a stupid card, discarding a stadium and then forcing the opponent to discard 3 cards from their hand, which combines with the red card item, which sets your opponent to a random 4-card hand, and when these two were combined, it could completely wipe the opponent out of resources and create an uninteractive game, leading to red card and delinquent being banned. But this combo is actually pretty hard to pull off without Shaymin, since you needed an item, a supporter, and a stadium all played in successive order. Shaymin made pulling off those handlock combos much easier. Hexmaniac received a ban for similar reasons as Delinquent, and just like Delinquent, it was Shaymin that was the initiator for this ban as well. However, now it's time to talk about what truly might be the most toxic deck in Pokemon TCG history, and a deck that resulted in the record for the most cards banned forever at the same time. If you thought the Toad Trump card Shaymin deck was toxic, you have not seen anything yet. This deck first started cropping up in Japan, and then it actually won and completely dominated the 2019 Champions League Tokyo Special Expanded event. This deck is essentially a Yu-Gi-Oh deck where you pull off an unstoppable turn 1 combo and your opponent just sits there helpless to do anything. The deck centers around Island Challenge Amulet. Island Challenge Amulet is a tool card that reduces the HP of the GX or EX it's attached to by 100. But in exchange, that Pokemon gives up one less prize card when it's knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack. Basically, since Jirachi EX only had 90 HP, attaching an Island Challenge Amulet to a Jirachi EX would result in it instantly being knocked out, and it would give the opponent 2 prize cards. The reason it would give 2 prize cards instead of 1 is because the amulet only prevented the extra prize card if the Pokemon was knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack. Mismagius from Unbroken Bonds knocks itself out and draws until you have 7 in your hand once per turn. And with the Duskstone item card, this could be done multiple times on turn 1. So the strategy basically involved giving your opponent 5 prize cards with Amulets, Jirachi, and Mismagius. Then you played either Reset Stamp to set them to a 1-card hand, or you would play Lieutenant Surge's strategy and then N to set your opponent to a 1-card hand. Then you played Mars to draw 2 and discard a card from your opponent's hand, which would in this case be the only card. And then you would finish off the turn with Chip Chip Ice Axe, which looks at the top 3 of the opponent's deck, chooses a card there to become their top deck, and shuffles the rest back, allowing you to control their hand for the next turn and give them a dead card to draw into. Then you would attach a Karate Belt to Giratina and Garchomp Tag Team GX, throw on a double Dragon Energy, and start swinging. Also, this deck could donk the opponent with Tina Chomp, since its GX attack could be used for 1 Karate Belt and a DDE, and it discards one of your opponent's Pokemon in play, which could be used to discard the only Pokemon your opponent had in play, turn 1, going second to win the game. So let me get this straight. A permanent handlock, excessive turbo drawing to the bottom of your deck, giving the opponent prize cards, a beat stick, 3 prize tag team Pokemon, and donk potential. Let's just say the community was not happy about this deck. And apparently TPCI wasn't either, as they went on a historic banhammer frenzy, banning 8 cards in one day, 5 of which were 100% because of this deck. Mismagius, Reset Stamp, which was actually banned a bit before this tournament, Lieutenant Surge's strategy, Island Challenge Amulet, and Chip Chip Ice Axe were all hit with bans under a week after the Japanese tournament where these cards dominated, and Puzzle of Time would join the ban list soon after. This deck, quite honestly, is hard to look at. You're really just sitting down for a game of Pokemon versus an opponent playing a deck where they try to methodically take huge knockouts and multi-prize turns, just to hand to your opponent 5 prize cards in a 0-card hand with a top deck you deem useless, while you spam an attack from a 3-prize Pokemon until you win the game. But think about it. How on earth is a player pulling off a combo like this on turn 1? Oh wait. With 4 Shaymin EX, I can do anything I want on turn 1. Why not just prevent my opponent from doing anything and farm wins against any deck in the game? Maybe even win a whole tournament by doing this to every opponent? Yeah, but funnily enough, shortly after this deck was born in 2019, and after it died in 2019, the Sword and Shield Rebel Clash expansion would do something truly unbelievable. After half a decade of Shaymin EX getting cards banned left and right in the expanded format, it was finally time for it to get a taste of its own medicine. Scoop Up Net was released in this set in 2020, and it puts a Pokemon into your hand in play that isn't a Pokemon GX or V, but it could pick up a Pokemon EX. Like, say, a Pokemon EX with an ability that only works when it's played onto the bench. Maybe a Pokemon EX that could enable any combo in the history of the game to be pulled off on turn 1. Shortly after the set released, Shaymin EX was finally banned from the expanded format, and the years of Shaymin spamming to abuse ban-worthy cards was over. Ironically, Scoop Up Net would also be banned and expanded during the Scarlet and Violet era. This was due to the new Pokemon EX like Iron Valiant synergizing too well with it, leading to donk combos on turn 1 that were unhealthy. But that's besides the point. Shaymin was gone. but the legacy it's left behind is nothing short of remarkable. Now I think it's time to explain why Shaymin EX is a fundamentally broken Pokemon card. I mean, the main reason is pretty obvious. It exists outside the rules of the game by allowing you to draw too many cards. The reason cards like Professor's Research are supporter cards is that their effect is so powerful that only one use per turn is the only way to keep them balanced. But why then does Shaymin have an ability that does the exact same thing as supporter cards like Bianca, but has no restriction and can be used more than once per turn? For reference, Crobat V has the exact same ability as Shaymin, but is restricted to one use per turn, and it was still a great card and easily one of the best of the Sword and Shield era, despite being balanced pretty fairly in comparison to Shaymin. Shaymin just does too much. It makes decks better at a rate too high for the amount of deck space it takes up. Its ability is the only reason many cards have been banned despite being in relatively balanced states before they were used with Shaymin, or the card couldn't be good without Shaymin. I think the Amulet deck is the perfect example, because attempting to pull off a combo like this without Shaymin is like expecting a cricket to build a skyscraper. It's just not possible without breaking the rules of the game. All I can hope for is that Pokemon never prints anything as close to as good as Shaymin again, and if they do, I hope we never have to re-experience the doings of one of the most broken Pokemon cards of all time.